All right, welcome. Today, we're going to jump right in and unpack one of the most important, and let's be honest, most complicated parts of the Paris Agreement. We're talking about Article 6. Our goal here is to demystify this whole idea of a global climate market. So here's the big question at the heart of it all. Can countries actually trade their way to a cooler planet? It sounds a little strange, right? But that's the core idea of Article 6. It's all about international cooperation. It's about turning individual climate promises into, well, a global team sport. Okay, to really get this, we have to start with something called NDCs, or Nationally Determined Contributions. Now, you can think of these as the absolute foundation of the Paris Agreement. Every single country creates its own unique climate action plan, its own pledge on how it's going to cut emissions. So if the NDCs are all the individual goals for each country, then Article 6 is the official rulebook that lets them team up to hit those goals. It basically creates pathways for one country to, say, invest in a green project in another country, and then count those emission cuts toward its own target. Now, you're probably wondering, how does this cooperation actually work in practice? Well, Article 6 lays out 3 different ways to do it. 2 are based on markets, and 1 is a totally different approach. Let's look at the 2 market paths. First, you've got Article 6.2. This is all about direct deals between countries, bilateral agreements. Think of it as one country making a direct deal with another. Then you have Article 6.4, which is much bigger. It sets up a centralized global carbon market that's supervised by a UN body. This is a multilateral system, and it's meant to be the successor to the old clean development mechanism you might remember from the Kyoto Protocol. And then there's that third path, Article 6.8. This one is really interesting because it's not about trading credits at all. It's focused on other kinds of cooperation, like sharing clean technology, helping build capacity, or providing finance for climate projects. You know, some countries are pretty wary of markets, so they see this as a really vital alternative. Now, for those market mechanisms to work, you obviously need something to actually trade. And that's where ITMOs come in. It's a bit of a mouthful, Internationally Transferred Mitigation Outcome. But it's just the official name for a verified unit of emission reduction. Basically, it's a carbon credit representing 1 ton of CO2 that can be bought and sold between countries. Okay, this next part is absolutely critical. How do you make sure that the same ton of reduced CO2 isn't being claimed by both the country that sold it and the country that bought it? That would totally undermine the whole system. That's where the corresponding adjustment comes in. It is the golden rule. If a country sells an ITMO, it has to add that ton back to its own emissions count. It's like they say you can't spend the same dollar twice. This is what ensures the whole thing has environmental integrity. And hey, this isn't just some abstract theory. It's already happening. Countries are putting Article 6.2 into practice with pilot projects right now. For example, Switzerland is funding things like sustainable rice farming in Ghana and a fleet of electric buses in Bangkok. The emission cuts from those projects then get transferred back to Switzerland as ITMOs. But even as these deals are getting off the ground, negotiators are still in back rooms hammering out the fine print. And trust me, making a global market like this fair, transparent, and actually effective, well, it's incredibly complex. The devil is truly in the details. A huge piece of the puzzle is transparency. I mean, you have to be able to trust the system. So countries that get involved in these trades have to follow a really strict reporting pipeline. They have to file an initial report explaining the project, give annual updates on the trades, and regularly show how it all helps them meet their big picture climate goals. All this reporting, though, has become a major point of debate, especially for developing nations who might not have the same resources. To really understand this, let's take a look at the official perspective that India submitted to the UN. So what India is basically saying here is all about efficiency. They're arguing, hey, look, we already have to do a ton of reporting for transparency under another part of the agreement, Article 13. Let's make sure these new rules for Article 6 actually line up with what we're already doing so we don't get buried in paperwork. And this table really breaks down their specific ideas. They're suggesting things like aligning the reporting deadlines with existing ones to reduce the administrative load. They want to authorize projects at the local level to make use of systems already in place. It all comes back to a core goal: make the system practical and efficient, especially for nations that can't afford a massive bureaucracy just for reporting. This whole debate just goes to show how high the stakes really are. And while the negotiators are still writing the final chapters of the rulebook, the world isn't exactly waiting around. Just get a load of this number. By the end of 2023, there were already 65 of these bilateral deals under Article 6.2, either signed or about to be signed. That's some serious momentum, and it makes getting the rules right now even more urgent. But of course, major concerns are still out there. Critics worry that richer countries could just swoop in and buy up all the cheapest and easiest emission reduction projects, the low-hanging fruit, from developing nations. This could leave those host countries stuck with only the most expensive and difficult ways to meet their own climate goals. That's a huge opportunity cost. People are also worried about the largely unregulated voluntary carbon markets and making sure that this carbon trading doesn't get mixed up with the separate promise of climate finance. As you can see from this timeline, this whole process is a moving target. The rulebook is being built piece by piece. Key roles were established back at COP26 in Glasgow, more guidance came out of COP27, but the work is never really done. At every climate conference, negotiators are still fine-tuning everything from reporting formats to the super complex rules around carbon removals. Which, of course, brings us back to the ultimate question. Article 6, it really does present this powerful vision for global climate cooperation. But with so many of these critical details still being debated, the real challenge is to build a market that isn't just efficient, but one that's also fair, transparent, and ambitious enough to actually tackle the climate crisis at the scale we need. Can it truly deliver on that promise? Well, that's a story that's still being written.